please describe how you will hold accountable individuals employed by Georgia Department of Education if they continue to promote divisive concepts which were recently made illegal by the passage of state law? And we realize that you may have answered some of these, but you might want to go into depth a little bit.
So prior to this, one of the things we have already begun to do is actually we have two individuals that now over the past year that we've been looking at and putting some processes in place in which they look at our website. I think there are a lot of things that were out there in the website, and again, you begin to collect a lot of stuff. So, you know, we sat and we've had individuals scrub through the website to make sure there was not any content or any links that were out there. I mean, yes, we did find some things that were questionable, but I think that it was one of the things we found out is that prior to coming into office, there was nothing in which there was in place. There was a lot of, I guess, individualism within the department. There were individuals that perhaps had their own agendas, and so a lot of that had to be reined in. And that meant getting a lot of the right people in, and it also meant getting a lot of the wrong people out. And so that's been a process in which we've done that. We continue to look at, even now, when we look at teacher training, what does that look like? Well, I mean, everything has to come to our screeners at the front of the office to make sure that is aligned to our message, and again, the expectation, and again, we are not promoting something that you know, is unacceptable, and in any of the areas that we talked about. For myself, again, looking at conferences that we go to, I think that, you know, where we attend and where our brand is, that's very important as well. And there have actually been a couple of conferences in which I was even invited to, and once we got involved or looking into it and said, no, this is not good for us. And so we have to have that high level of expectation that comes and is filtered throughout that. I mean, that is something that I've been very strong with. And again, my chief of staff and other members in leadership is what we're about to promote. And because at the end of the day, I said, we're about kids. We're not about indoctrinating kids, but we are about educating kids. We're out here to make sure they have a great education. And that primarily means that they need to read, they need to write, they need to be able to communicate and do math. And again, have a good skill set that will allow them to get a great career. And plus, those things that we're looking at, we want to make sure that we're not interfering and even sending a wrong message to the local level. That's something we have to be very, you know, mindful of as well. What is that message that we're sending there? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? So our goal is to make sure that we are setting the right example, beginning at the top, beginning with me, beginning with my staff. And again, we will continuously monitor what goes on, anything that we're involved with, to make sure. And again, as always, I hope that we can say that we have eyes from you as well. I mean, there are things that, yes, it potentially could get through. But I guarantee you this, one thing people have found out, once things are brought to my attention, I act upon it. And it is not a slight weight. And we've had a lot of conversations with people that said, this is what our expectation is, and if that is something you cannot adhere to, then, you know, perhaps another place of opportunity is something that really is best for you in your future.
Chairman Nolan, one of the questions is, there's evidence that divisive concepts are coming into our schools through social emotional learning. What will you do to ensure that the Board of Education does not authorize any funds that allow for this?
So this has obviously been something that we've been working with. This is one of the questions that I asked a lot about early on, particularly when we were taking COVID funds. I wanted to make sure that we weren't getting, by the way, I'm not the only one. There are 7 of us on the board, and the majority of the board asked the same question. We wanted to make sure that there wasn't a caveat to taking the money whereby we had to implement a program or a policy into the school district that would push the CRT narrative. So what we do and what we have been doing is, first and foremost, it's important to me to maintain a partisan school board so that people understand where your values both morally and fiscally rely. And After you do that, you have to hire the right superintendent. We hired the right superintendent. We actually hired our CFO as our next superintendent. He knows how the money is spent in our district. We rely heavily on him. He's a God-fearing man, and he's an excellent superintendent. As a board, that is basically our primary function. As a school board member, people think we have a lot more power than we actually have. Our primary function is to hire the superintendent of the school district and maintain a relationship with the superintendent and make sure that the superintendent does his job the way the board sees fit. Our superintendent is doing a spectacular job from the standpoint of making certain that we don't have, and we ask these questions. We drill down quite a bit, particularly when grants come in. So if we're asking the right questions and our superintendent's doing his job, then those things aren't going to creep in. I will say this, and to Mr. Wood's comment, our board says exactly the same thing to the parents and the constituents and the kids that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We're not in the classroom. I am not going to sit here and tell you that out of 3,000 staff members, the vast majority of those being teachers, that we don't have folks that are spewing things that I would prefer our kids not hear. What we can do, our board has to vote on every personnel decision within the county. Our board has to vote on, and we can pull a line item personnel decision out for discussion if we need to, and we've done that. We had a teacher last year who signed a national petition saying that they were going to push CRT regardless of the rule in the school. They can't do that now because we now have a law, it's written right here, it's 10 pages, that's going to prevent that. And it's going to give us teeth to be able to hold that teacher accountable if we know that that's the plan. So, it's build a case. It's do the right thing the right way. Make sure that you have a leg to stand on. Teachers have a fair amount of rights with regards to how they're hired and fired. And if your superintendent has the right person in the HR job, then you're not going to have an issue when you have a bad apple and weeding that bad apple out. But as our district grows, we're going to need parents and students to become more vigilant and bring these things to our attention and say, hey guys, this happened in the classroom. And that's happened a couple times this year. Mr. Fuller and I got notices that we had some things in the classroom that really weren't in keeping with how we want to handle educating our kids, and we made some inquiries. Those inquiries were brought to the principal's attention. The principal worked all the way down, and the issue got changed. So that's how we're doing it at this point. You have to do your job as a school board member. You can't mail it in. If you really want to make sure that these things aren't creeping into your curriculum and these things aren't creeping in to the system as a whole through the personnel, you have to pay attention. You have to be in the schools. You have to you have to know the people that work in the school district, and you have to work with your superintendent and give your superintendent the ability to enforce those rules.
Superintendent Woods, I believe you touched on this a minute ago, but who approves the professional development that's offered to the DOE staff, the school counselors, and the directors of curriculum in each county? There seems to be CRT slipping in those areas. Is this continued education review for divisive concepts, and would you be willing to establish a committee that vets these trainings and reports back to you with their findings?
Okay. Well, again, at different levels, I mean, when you talk about at the state level, what we deal with is what we call standards. In other words, that's what we expect our students to learn. That's what we expect our teachers to teach. And so any of that training that, typically would come from us, that, would be involved that. Sometimes we may work with groups we call RESAs, or Regional Educational Service Agencies, and they may handle some of the tests or some of the training as well. In some cases you have like your school board. You have a group called the Georgia School Board Association, so there may be some training in some of these off groups as well. So it is something we have to look at, but typically when you're looking at teacher training, professional learning, a a lot of that, yes, if it is something that we host or we're responsible for, that does come from the DOE. That is something that, as I've shared, that we do have individuals that are looking at things. We are looking at every presentation that we present out to the public. We are looking at communication, information that is being, presented by us at the Department of Education. So a lot of this now has become, centralized, and that we filter through it to make sure that it meets our level of standards and expectation before it goes out. So that's something that, I feel very good with. Now, at the local level, there are things when you talk about curriculum. Now, curriculum, in a sense, is, what are the materials that are used to teach the standards or teach the content? Well, that is something that's handled at the local level. We don't decide what books are going to be used, what computer programs are being used, or anything of that nature. So it is something that it is hand to hand. I mean, by and large, we are a local control state. I mean, if you read our Constitution, and trust me, you do not necessarily, and I would say in my opinion, you do not want a strong centralized system of government. Okay. I mean, you know what your community needs, and we want to make sure that our job is to support the direction and the community, values that are here. And so, that's where we do work together. But I would go back to the legislation has been passed. On April 28th, the governor will sign all the education bills in that, and that will be a process at that point in which we at the Department of Education, our policy team, we will be the ones that look at what does that look like. And there are components for the local level, and there are components for the state level as well. So it is kind of multi-layered as far as looking at having multiple eyes look at something, and multiple, paths for recourse that you have down here. So I feel that, like I said, we have a good process, we have a good blanket that is looking at both the state level and the local level that can address issues that we have seen cropped up. But the big thing is we have to be vigilant. We have to make sure that we never get out of the way. I kind of go back to the Bible. It's like when God says, who's in the gap? You cannot leave the gap, because there are a lot of people that are waiting to come in, and I think we have to, just that was spoken here, yes, there are some people that have their own personal agenda. But hopefully as we look at this and with this legislation, if you want to have your own personal agenda, it will come with personal consequence as well.
And to add to Mr. Wood's statement, at the local level, we've already reviewed one training opportunity for teachers and separated. And we're working through all of them. The GSBA is a separate organization. We're a member of the GSBA. And we actually, our last meeting, anybody can go back and look at it, we just went through the GSBA legislative priorities, and we actually made so many changes to the legislative priority that we were invited to the meeting on the 25th to discuss everything, because they'd never gotten that many changes from the school board before. So we're on top of we're on top of what's happening for teacher training at the local level, and how how that's going to affect us in the future. So we definitely have local eyes on that, and I completely agree. I do not want anybody from the state coming in and telling Paulding County how to run our county at any level of government. That is a localized thing. I appreciate Mr. Woods for saying that. It's important that we maintain that local control. That's how it's set up and how it should remain.
Okay, Chairman Nolan, to follow up on that, a couple of, you segued right into the question I was going to ask you. Can the local school board turn down ESA, or APA funds? And a second part of that is there an alternative to the Georgia School Board Association that is available right now?
So first off, forgive me, I don't know the funds that you're asking me about. I would tell you that we have...
It's the ESSER funds.
Oh, the ESSER funds. So the ESSER funds that we took, we're following the guidelines to the T. We could turn them down, I suppose. I mean, I think we could do that. And if they had included things that were going to force us at a federal level to handle things differently than we wanted to at a local level, then I'm certain we would have. We were very diligent about asking those questions before we took those funds, and how we're spending them is segregated. It is, so any citizen in Paulding County can request exactly how we are spending our COVID, the relief funds, basically. There's 3 or 4 tranches on that. But as a board and as a superintendent, Mr. Barnett has been very diligent at maintaining a good record of how we spent the funds, how we are spending the funds, because I think we still have, Mr. Fuller, I think, what, another year to finish out the rest of the money? I think that's right. So, so we have a time limit. We haven't spent all of the funds yet. But I can tell you this, we're focused on the learning gap that occurred for a lot of these kids, and we're trying to work with those funds to do the best we can to fix that. We used ESSER funds to put Wi-Fi in buses, along with a collaboration from one of the service providers, so that kids could go park in church parking lots during quarantine and still be able to do their work online, because we don't have broadband in certain parts of the county. So the way we use our funds wouldn't be, at least the way my understanding is, we wouldn't be using funds in a way that would give us the federal issues that you're concerned about. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, Superintendent Woods. Federal policies and funding from ESSER, Every Student Succeeds, and the American Rescue Plan play a key role in advancing SEL policies both statewide and district-wide. Is there an obligation to use these funds for CASEL or any other SEL platform? If so, who establishes those guidelines, and how are they implemented on the state, district, and local levels?
Okay. Again, the COVID relief funds, there were basically 3 buckets we had. We received 3 rounds of funding. It expanded, I think, to 2025, so there is a limit with that. How the funds are spent, we were given a lot of flexibility, and I would say especially under the Trump administration, which 2 of those buckets came, there was no quantifier that said you had to use it for SEL. You did not have to use it for CASEL. And to be honest, when you look at CASEL, again, that social emotional, they have established, I guess, some national standards and stuff like that. Well, lo and behold, CASEL tried to get into Georgia, and I kicked that out. I said, no, we're not taking that money. We're not adapting any national standards when it comes to SEL with that. And we've done, and so we've been very proactive in looking at anything that's coming in. As regards to how those funds are used, there's nothing that says a district has to use those funds at all in anything that's SEL, critical race theory, or anything of that nature. So if somebody is using that, then that would be by choice at the local level. Now, there are things in which we're actually doing a report to see how that money is spent, because primarily what we have issued from the state level, and again, even how we spend the funding, how we spent some of the funding we've had, has been to support our local teachers, again, to make sure that they had that. There was about a year ago where every teacher and most of the staff received $1,000 just to say, hey, let's stay with us. Okay, well, that money came from that, and so that was, some of the things we looked at. We worked with after-school program to catch our kids up, because there were 2 things that, looking at the COVID relief funds and how they should be used and what we have expressed to the district. First of all, we need to make sure our kids are where they need to be academically. Okay, not talking social and emotionally or anything of that nature, but we need to make sure our kids are caught back up where they need to be, but also make sure that we're moving those kids forward that are ready to move. And education does not stop. We're not trying to bring it into a mediocre middle, but also to make sure that we're looking after and protecting our workforce, to keep our teachers in place, our cafeteria workers in place, our bus drivers in place. Those are people, like a lot of people don't understand. If you don't have bus drivers and cafeteria workers, you can't have school face-to-face, okay? And if you don't have substitutes, you can't have face-to-face instruction. So, we've invested the money, but anything that is being spent, and again, we look at things of this nature to make sure it's in place. But I think that for every school district, you need to be looking at these 3 bills that are about to be signed into law. Because if you're spending money on anything that like that, then you've got some serious answering to do, and trouble will probably be coming your way because of what our expectation is. But again, some districts have drawn those funds down to some degree. There's still a lot of money out there, but the bottom line is nobody has to spend a single dime on any of the topics that we're talking about. In fact, to be honest, you don't have to spend a single dime, period, if you didn't want to. Okay.
Chairman Nolan, can you give us specifics on what you think is the most feasible way the school board can close the achievement gap caused by COVID-19 pandemic?
Wow.
I want to hear this answer too, so obviously this is
So two things. Number one, I'm not an educator. Never have been an educator. What I can tell you is I'm going to fumble all over that question. So I'm just being honest with you. What I can tell you that the school district is doing, so they've worked hard over in the summers and after hours with all of the programs that are Learning Bridge. Take them for instance. The after school programs that we're working with. It's a focus. One of the things that, as Paulding County, I don't think our gap is going to be anywhere near as great as some of the gaps that you'll see statewide, because we kept our schools open. We got 4 years of education across the bout. Do we have some gaps? There's no question about it. I think that's going to start showing up in the reading and the math scores. But I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to beat the state average in those respects. So for some specifics, we are actually, as a board, we've asked our superintendent and his staff to work on showing us as a board what they are doing to bring the education gap to a close and get everybody, again, education doesn't stop, and moving forward. The specific measures, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but if anybody's got that question and wants to hear the answer to it, I'll certainly get the answer and come back to you for sure.
Thank you.
And can I just follow up with that?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I'll share with the state, at the state level, my perspective as a teacher. When we first entered COVID, and especially last year, one of the things I looked at is I made sure that I said, we've got to allow teachers to teach, okay? Who is the one person that was going to make the biggest difference in the lives of a child? That's your teacher, when it comes to education. I mean, you think about who was your favorite teacher. Who was the teacher that made an impact upon you? That person's in your brain right now. And that person was not in your brain right now because they gave great tests, but it's because they gave you a great relationship. Relationships is a key thing. I mean, that's where you earn that trust. And so our instruction to our teachers was, listen, you need to start off, as these young people come back, they don't know what type of world they're coming into. If you listen to the media, I mean, it was all doom and gloom. And you thought that if kids stepped into the classroom, the apocalypse was about to happen, okay? And so we had to make sure that we set the environment that we had trust and relationships. That was the first part. And that's what we promoted and made sure. We made sure that we had the ability in the state of Georgia to make sure schools were open. The vast majority of schools throughout the state of Georgia were open. And I appreciate Governor Kemp and allowing us to do that, because I am so grateful that I am not the superintendent of California or New York or any other blue state that's out there. That paid big dividends about where our kids are. We also have something called Beacon. Beacon is something that was created by the group that does milestones for us. But it's a formative tool, and it is made free to every single school district. In other words, this costs nothing for any school district. But what it does allow the teacher to do is that it is aligned to our standards. It is a formative tool that they can use throughout the course of the year to find out where their kids are. And that way they can make the adjustment on an individual basis, not collectively as a whole. And of course, that's again just freeing up time. We've got to prioritize where we're at. And I think our schools have done a good job when you looked at, especially at the beginning of this year, let's find out where our kids are. I mean, you can't make just random decisions, but you've got to know what you're dealing with so that you can make that adjustment. And so we've been working real hard with that to do that. So, you know, again, as stated, I think we're going to be in much better shape as the state of Georgia. Last year, we had about 25 to 30% of our kids didn't take the milestones, so we really didn't have an idea of what that looked like. But this year, we expect to be back to normal, but there are things that are going on. But like I said, first and foremost was give our teachers the time to teach and let them build that positive relationship. You talk about social and emotional stuff, a positive relationship will do more to add stability to a classroom than any program you can bring in.
Thank you. And Chairman Nolan, that was not a gotcha kind of question. That was,
I understand.
And thank you, sir. Thank you, Superintendent, because that gives you more ability, I think, to talk with your board and work together.
Yeah,
at the state
no question.
And the county level.
No
So,
question.
okay, Superintendent Woods, this is the next question is something about, has been kind of pushed aside because of CRT and SEL and DEI and everything else with the initials, but it's something that is still on people's minds, and that is, could you please tell us how you have addressed Common Core in the revision of the math standards in the schools now?
Okay. Well, I'm glad to say we have new math standards in the state of Georgia. Okay. But you talking about politics rearing its ugly head? That was a fight, and people can say that you could easily come in and change those standards. When I came in office, again, it was my pledge that we would get rid, because I just saw it said Common Core standards. They were bad standards. They were not even written by teachers. They were put in place, and again, especially in the area of math, it disenfranchised our parents. Are you talking about trying to, you know, take away the right of the parent? When I have engineers who could not help their child with third grade math, that's a problem, okay? I said, math is math, and it's been that way for thousands of years. And there's nothing wrong with learning math the way we have learned it over the years. I mean, we put people on the moon doing it with that. So, you know, so I think that as we look, it began a process. Now, to be honest, there are a group of people I have to work with called the State Board of Education. Okay. Well, they have to approve anything that I send forward to them, and that was standards. And so I knew where the 14 and where collectively where they were going, I was not going to get that passed. But I did, one of the things I did initially is that I opened up the option to say that Georgia could adopt new standards. Because initially when you looked and we took all that race to the top money, there were two options. There was an option A and there was an option B. Option A basically said, you will adopt Common Core standards. We adopted new standards, and I told the board, I said, all you've done is whitewashed and changed the name. And I proved it. I said, here's the state of New York standards. They were the exact same as Georgia. But so over the process, and again, once we got the new governor and he began to appoint new people to the board, I was able to have the majority that agreed with my stance, and we were able to do that. And so over this past year, we like I said, COVID kind of got in the way a little bit, but now we adopted new math standards. And I tell people, I said, there is nothing that tells us how we have to teach our children how to learn. And if mom and dad want to teach their kids and show them this is the process, we reiterate. So now we're in the process of putting that into place. So we have new standards, and now we're looking at, you know, providing professional learning for our teachers and getting that up and going. So we'll be hitting that wide open beginning next year. But it did not stop with that, because we have another set of standards, English Language Arts. That is Common Core. We're about to take that on beginning in May. And so we're going to have new English Language Arts standards that will replace Common Core as well. So that much, yes, we are working, but I can tell you, it was harder than pulling teeth. And I'd say it was harder than pulling my own teeth. That's how tough it was, because not everyone believed the path that we wanted. There was a lot of old investment, and like I said, when you have the establishment fighting against you, that's a big deal. But yet, one of the things I found out is that you don't give up, and you keep fighting, you keep fighting, you keep fighting. And again, we finally came out on the winning side. And that's what, we've done. So that's where we are. And when it comes to Common Core, I can't wait to get rid of that trash in the state of Georgia.
Yes,
This will be the last question, Chairman Nolan. As we all know, there's a lot of controversy about the books in the library. So you've touched on the bills that are waiting to be signed. How do you see the new bill regarding obscenity in the libraries, public schools, K through 12? How do you see that affecting that situation? And another question is, can the authority actually be transferred from the superintendent and the board members to a principal to be able to make those decisions about what's best for his community values in his school?
So I haven't read the full bill, but I can tell you that what I appreciate is that our legislators did something about the problem, and it's going to give parents the ability to bring things forward, and as a school board, we'll be able to review them, I believe is the way I understand the way this works. So from that perspective, I think we all saw the news clip from Cherokee County a couple weeks ago where mom brought the book in and the board wouldn't even let her read what was in the book at the board meeting where they encouraged the piece of literature. So I mean, it's one of those things where, what is it they said, I don't know what pornography, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know what it is when I see it. So I think the way we would act as a board is the way we've always acted. What's in the best interest of the folks who are bringing this to our attention? And if it's obscene and 7 of us think that it's obscene, it's going to go away. I would tell you that we give a lot of latitude to the principals to run their schools in our district. We don't micromanage, we hire well. But if we've got a principal, and this has happened, that is out of line on something, then it's our job as a school board to work with the superintendent to push that back down through the system and make sure every level of the system understands, from the superintendent down to the principal, exactly what the school board expects and how we expect that to be meted out. And we've done that. There have been things along the way where, and obviously for personnel issues, I won't go into details, but there have been instances since I've been on the school board where we've had an issue at a principal level and we've had to push back down from the school board level through the leadership to get the problem fixed. And we don't hesitate to do that. So if we've got a principal who's I can't really say that off the reservation anymore, I guess, but if we've got a principal that's not doing what they're supposed to do, then we're going to let them know, particularly if somebody brings it to our attention. And that's, again, the biggest piece of this. Parents and students in the schools have to communicate with us as a school board and tell us what they see and hear. Otherwise, I mean, we're not in the school every day. We're not in the teacher's classroom every day. If we've got an issue, somebody's got to bring it to our attention. Sometimes we can deal with it, sometimes we can't. And I would say that there has to be a reasonable middle ground on certain things. We can't, the pendulum can't swing too far one direction or the other in any situation, or you lose control of the whole thing. So as far as the obscene materials concerned, I think that now that this law's in place, there'll be a concerted effort of parents to bring things to the school board, which we will have a review on. And if it doesn't belong in the schools, then I can assure you this candidate will not be voting for it to stay in schools.
Thank you both so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.